All right, everyone. So, I'm going to start off today talking about what are called HTML5 container tags. So, I want to step backwards a little bit. Okay. So, let's look. Here's a look at this article on a website called Hoodline, which is kind of like local news website. And you can see that, like, let's kind of break this down. Like, this is a headline, right? For this article about some raw oyster pop-up restaurant. So that's like an H1, right? And then we got a photo. So that would be like an IMG tag, right? And then I have, there's this paragraph. That's a P tag. Looks like it has a couple of links in it. So those would be hyperlinks or A tags, right? This is like capitalizing them, but they really should all be, they don't have to be, but they do typically be lowercase, right? And then, so, you know, I would go through and like list every tag, HTML tag that's in this article, right? But the problem is this. There really isn't a way for me to at least in the old version of HTML, HTML 4.01, which was the standard until about 2010, there really wasn't a way to organize all of this together, right? Like, it's like, okay, you can have an individual heading, you can have an individual image and an individual hyperlink, right? And this is all within a paragraph, right? But it's like, how do I organize this together as one thing, right? The way I like to think of it is like, you know, if you're on your desktop and you have a bunch of files that are related to each other. So I have like a picture, and I got like another picture, and I got another picture. How can I organize these together? Well, you know, digitally, a lot of times what people do is they'll put them into a folder. Like that, right? And you give a name to a folder. Or if you're in a program like Photoshop or Illustrator, there's usually some sort of feature where if you have like a bunch of layers, you can organize them into groups or something like that, right? And so what I needed to be able to do is I need to group these together. Okay. So it'd be nice if I could group these together. Also, semantically, you know, because that's kind of the point of HTML, this is not very good because it's like, oh, this is a heading, and this is an image, and this is a paragraph, but it's not really describing what this is, which is this is an article. It's kind of a set and a subset, right? So it's like an article has a headline, but it also has paragraphs, and it's probably going to have an image, and it's probably going to have hyperlinks, right? So, you know, we need a way to organize these together. And so that was kind of the idea when HTML5 came about, that we need to have sort of more semantic sort of containers where we can contain smaller things like paragraphs and headings and things. So we have some of these, you know, like I said, think of an HTML5 container kind of like a folder. It kind of organizes smaller tags together into a larger, better semantic idea. Okay, so here's a couple of the things here. So here's a nav, and here's a footer, or here's a header, nav, footer. So let's start with header. Okay, now people get confused by this because header makes it sound like the head section, and we've talked about how the head section is for metadata. I know this is confusing, but the header has nothing to do with the head section of the document. Instead, let's go to like Chabot's website for a second. Okay, and you can do this on your own too, by the way. So here's Chabot's website, right? And let's just look at this web page, right? And I'm going to go to another web page. I'm going to click on, I don't know, accreditation. And, you know, it's got its own information. And then I go to, I don't know, parking. And it's got its own page, right? But you'll notice that this top part here, this part of my document always stays the same, right? like there's this kind of content in this top part of my document that no matter what page I click on, I don't know if I can still use this one. I guess not. Oh well. I was kind of hoping I could keep it on. Well, but like, you know, here's this top part here. I'm just going to go real quickly, right? And if I go to another page, notice, like governance, for instance, notice how this is the same. Okay, so the header section is for content that repeats at the top of every web page. Okay. Notice I don't specifically say what's in the header, it just kind of repeats. So like here's, you know, this is like an image, this is and this is like a these are a navigation bar, which are basically hyperlinks, and this is some text, right? But what's in the header kind of change, you know, website to website. So if I go to say Amazon.com, so let's just kind of click on a couple of pages here. So if I go here and I go click on back to school, for instance, right? This part kind of changes, but this part at the top stayed the same. If I go under beauty and personal care, once again, this part changes, right? This updated with new text or new images or products or whatever. But this part stayed the same. So, you know, there's like the Amazon logo, and these are some hyperlinks, and these are some hyperlinks, and this is something called a form, which we'll talk about. So, you know, what's inside of the header can change, but, you know, is kind of up to the developer, right? Every website might have something slightly different. It may have social media, it might have other information, you know, it's kind of up to you. But the point is that whatever is in the header is going to repeat at the top of every web page, okay? We also have something called the footer. So think about the header. What is the header? Well, the header is at the top, right? Like your head is at the top of your body. So your foot is at the bottom of your body. So the footer is like the header, but is for content that repeats at the bottom of every web page, okay? So if I go back to Chabot College, let's go to the bottom and just notice I have this kind of area down here with like, you know, it's got some information about the college and it's got some social media links and whatnot, right? It's got an outdated copyright symbol. Should probably fix that. One of us should probably go talk to them and fix that. And if I go to another web page, let's say, I don't know, diversity and inclusion, notice how this repeats at the bottom, or athletics. Actually, that's probably going to take me to a different website, so that's slightly different, but I don't know, academic overview. See how this repeats at the bottom? So this would be the footer, okay? Think about, so, you know, like I said, what you put in the header and what you put in the footer is kind of up to you, but let's think about this from a realistic, you know, standpoint. If you had information that was important, let's say you're running a website, would you want to put that important information in the header? Or would you want to put that important information in the footer? Just think about it for a couple of seconds before I say the answer. All right. So the answer is because you always see the header and people don't always get to the footer. If you had important information, you probably want to put it in the header. I mean, you're not required to, but it makes sense that you would want to put important information so that people can see it in the header section, and you would want to put less important information in the footer, or at least, you know, so you'll notice that if you look at the footer of most websites, it doesn't have really super important information, or otherwise it's very specific information. So in other words, like, you know, social media is helpful, but it's not like super important. I don't know, it depends on your definition. You know, there's a Google map here, but it's assuming that people who go there already sort of know that. A lot of times, you know, businesses like Amazon or other companies will put job postings there because the job postings is very precise. It's not for everyone. It's only for specific people who they want to have apply for that. So, that's kind of the idea. So we have the header, the footer. We also have the main section. Main is the main part of the document. So the main section is for content that is specific to that web page. So in other words, like if I was going to draw it out, this is the header. This is the main section, and at the bottom should be the footer. They're separated. In other words, the main section should not be nested inside of the header, and the footer should not be nested in the main. They're separate parts, kind of like how the head and the body are separate parts. They work together, but they're not inside of one another. So the idea is like that the top part is for content that goes on top of every web page in your website. This is for the information that goes at the bottom of every web page in your website. And this is for information that's specific to that page. So for instance, here, this academic information is specific to this academic page. It doesn't repeat on any other page. If I go to, Title IX, I get information that's specific to Title IX. So this information is specific to this web page. It doesn't appear on other web pages, or if I go to under employment or something like that. Okay. So each section has its purpose and why we sort of have it. So let's kind of go back and look at some of these. So the nav tag is for denoting a navigation bar. So for instance, let's say I was on like a news site, right? Let's go back to this oyster bar, article here. So, most articles are probably going to have hyperlinks that go to other website or other articles a lot of times. So these like go to other, articles, right? So these are individual hyperlinks, but then I also have a group of hyperlinks. So for instance, like when you have a navigation bar, like something like this, or something like this, these are actually A tags. If you don't believe me, you can just like right click and go to inspect and see how that's an A tag. So navigation bars are really just a collection of hyperlinks. That's really all they are. In this case, there are a bunch of hyperlinks that are inside of a unordered list is basically all they are. You can kind of see how there's a link inside of the list item here. So the question is like, well, how, it helps the browser to know the difference between a navigation bar and just a regular hyperlink. So we can use the nav tag for this. So the main point here is that it's giving the browser more information. How the nav tag actually works is that screen readers, screen reader is a device that reads out content for people who have vision issues. If something is put in a nav tag, like a hyperlink, it won't read it out. Whereas if it's not in a nav tag, it would. So it's like by giving more information to the browser can do more stuff essentially. If I have a collection of things, I might want to put them into a section. A section is a collection of multiple things. So for instance, let's say I had multiple images that I kind of wanted to make like into a thumbnail gallery or something. So it's like if there's more than one, I might want to group them together. I would group them together in a section, kind of like how you might group things together in a folder. A-sides are for sidebars. This is less, I feel like this one's kind of a little bit outdated, but the idea is back in the day you would have like, this is more specifically with like blogs. Find like I don't know. So, we're all probably familiar with the traditional blog style, which is like, navigation bar, this is the main area, and then over here is like a sidebar, right? And the sidebar would have information, but the information wasn't relevant to the main article. Usually it was things like recent posts or categories, right? So a sidebar is for less important content, meaning it's not the main focus of the website. An article is for denoting an article. So this is a way of denoting the end of one article or idea and the beginning of another one. So maybe I might have multiple articles about, you know, like going back to here, it's like if I have an article about this and then maybe there's another article that comes after this about a different restaurant, for instance, maybe you might want to separate them into articles so that the browser knows when one article is done and the other, you know, the next one begins. Okay, so all this is very helpful semantically. It's also going to help us out a little bit when we get into cascading style sheets. A figure is for denoting an image with a caption. So we know how to make an image, or bring in an image, I should say. That's the img tag. We know how to write text. You can just use the p tag. But the problem is that the browser doesn't know how to connect the two together. So what a figure does is a figure will group these two together so that the browser knows that the text is related specifically to the image. Okay, this is called a figure, and then the text about the image is what we call a fig caption. Okay, here's some examples of what they might look like. So this is like a navigation bar or a group of hyperlinks inside of a nav tag. This would be like an article. An article would have like maybe an image, some text, hyperlink. A header would have everything related to the top of a website. So this could be like, you know, the website name, it could be a navigation bar, it could be a social media bar, you know, it could be a lot of things. It's really kind of up to the, you know, developer. So let's try this out. Let's connect the files for today. So you guys have files or drills I gave you. Oops. Bibbidi bobbidi boom. So you guys want to, you know, I gave you guys some files. That would be digm156 HTML advanced. Let's just add that to our sidebar. Add folder to workspace. Just to make things nice and easy for us. All right, let's try some examples of this. So I have this web page here. Let's just preview it, see what it looks like. And I'm just going to preview this in a browser. It looks something like this. So let's start adding some HTML5 containers so that we can better define this page. The first thing I'm going to do is I kind of notice there's a bunch of navigation links here. And right now they're just kind of sitting independently of each other. I want to group these together, so I'm going to use the nav tag. This is the beginning of my navigation bar. This is the end of my navigation bar. And I'm just going to beautify that to make it look all pretty. And so these are all children or nested inside of the nav tag. Now, if I look at this website, granted, I only have like one web page here, but chances are I probably want like the navigation bar and the name of the company to appear on every single web page. So that should really be in my header section. Okay, notice that the header and the head are not the same. I know it's a little confusing because they sound kind of similar. But I'm going to put in the header here. Okay, notice that my nav is nested inside of the header. So you can have container tags nested in other container tags. That's perfectly allowed. In the same way, I have this kind of information here at the bottom, this like, you know, copyright and legal information. Do you want a job? Once again, it's kind of like, these are things that would probably go in a footer. So let's put in that footer. Okay, once again, I'm just going to beautify this. I'm using Command Shift P is my keyboard shortcut. Or you can also go to View Command Palette and type in Beautify. So once again, there it is. And then everything between that is going to be, between my header and my footer, that's going to be my main. So my information here, I'm assuming, is not going to be like on every single page of this Acme Cola website. It's just going to be on this one page. So, you know, that's stuff that should be inside of a main tag. Okay. I have this kind of short article called The History of Acme Cola. I kind of want to put this all, I want to organize this together so that the browser knows that this is all one article. So I'm actually going to put this into an article. Not only that, I'm actually going to, I have this other section here that's about the ads, the sort of vintage ads. So that's not really related to this. This is like an article about the history. This is about like something kind of different. So really, this is like kind of one section. This is sort of like the history. And this is a completely different section about sort of the artwork, right? So I'm actually going to divide this into a section. So my main section is, my main tag is going to have two sections. One for the history. And I'm going to put all of the ads here into another section. This seems a little confusing. Don't worry, it'll make more sense. You got to think of it semantically, really. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to do, so I have each of these ads has like a has a date, right? And sort of I just want to put this caption underneath each of my pieces here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what's called a figure. Remember, figure organizes or sort of connects or combines an image with a caption, essentially. So if your image is not a standalone image and you want to put text with it that's related to it, or something that's related to the image, like maybe there's a hyperlink underneath or something, that should really go in a figure. If you're wondering why it's figure, figure has to do with the fact that this was originally invented for people who had like pie charts and things like that. That's why it's called figure. And then this is my caption. That would be a fig caption. Fig caption is a child of the figure. All right, so both the image and the fig caption should be nested in the figure. Okay. I'm just going to repeat that. I'm just going to cut this, put that here, and let's kind of do the same fig caption. All right, I'm just going to beautify this to make it look nice. All right, so I did all this additional structuring. The browser now knows that this is the top of my page. It knows that this is a navigation bar. It knows that this is an article. It knows that this is a section combined with a bunch of images, each image having a fig caption, having a caption attached to it. Like when we kind of learned about the head and the body and all that. Unfortunately, all of this is not going to dramatically change the way that this looks. It's going to change it a little bit. You'll notice that when I do this, that it kind of does this. Mostly because figures are block elements, and so they stack automatically vertically on top of each other. But other than that, you're not going to notice much. But this is better structured, okay? And structure is the name of the game here, because the idea is that the browser can use that information, okay? Like I said, like for instance, browsers, screen reader devices don't read out things that are in a nav tag, for instance. It also makes it easier to select things. So if I go to inspect, because each of these is divided up, see how I can select everything that's in the header, or I can select everything that's in the main tag, or I can select everything that's in the footer. At the moment, that doesn't really seem like a big deal, but trust me, when we start to work with cascading style sheets to stylize our page, or conversely, we're not going to cover this in this class, but if you were working with, like, say, JavaScript or something, and you wanted to, like, write some JavaScript to affect the header section of the page, having this all organized is going to make your life a lot simpler than if you hadn't done this. Okay, so there are reasons why we do this. Okay, it's not just for, just a busy work. I'm just going to do a couple more. So once again, just some more practice of this. Here I have this page. Okay. There's 3 separate articles about different types of dogs. So if I go back, right now, each article has an image, and it has a headline, and it has a couple of paragraphs about said dog. I'm going to go through here. Just put each into an article. So how the beagle goes inside of one. And the poodle goes inside of one. And let's beautify that. Command Shift or Control Shift P. Beautify. Alright, once again, doesn't change, like, it doesn't make it look much difference, but it's better structured. So if I do an inspect here, you can see that I can select now each article and everything inside of the article, including like the img tag, the h2, and both p tags, all by selecting this article. You guys see that? So that's why this is helpful. This will be very helpful to us. Okay. Let's do one more. So I talked about the idea of a section. Section. Sometimes people get, they get a little confused about when to use what type of tag. A section is when you're grouping things together. Think of a section tag kind of like a folder, if you will. So I'm going to open this browser here. So it's like, here I have a bunch of search engine links to different, past and current popular search engines. Okay, Google, Yahoo, Then I kind of change courses, and I like completely, have a bunch of images of bakery goods, right? So it's like, these aren't really related to this. This is about different colleges in the San Francisco area, so it's like, this isn't related to this, you know what I mean? So it'd be better if I kind of grouped this, which is the heading, and all of the links together. So I'm just going to put it into a section. In the same way you would group like-minded or similar image, items together in a folder on your desktop, it's like we're grouping similar content to each other. All of these bakery goods would be in a section. Bibbidi-bobbidi boom. Each of these is an article. I want to take all these articles, and you can have a section of articles. Think of it like this. Like, think of, most websites, like, let's say I go to sfgate.com. A lot of websites will divide their content up. So this is like Bay Area and State, and there's like a politics section, right? And there's like a local section, a food section. So each of those is like a section, right? Each of these is an article, different article about food, but they're all sort of under the, the banner of food, right? Or travel. Each of these is a different article about travel, but they all fall under the sort of the category of travel. You know what I mean? So each of these is a different article, but I can have a section of articles too. That's perfectly possible. So these are all related about San Francisco colleges. Oops. All right. Once again, it's not going to dramatically change the way that my page looks, but it is better structured, and I'm adding semantic understanding to the browser. Anytime you can give your browser more information, that's always helpful, because the browser needs as much information as it can. Because remember my analogy of like clay. Clay by itself is just kind of amorphous. It doesn't really look like anything. You have to take the clay and you have to mold it into like a vase or a glass or an ashtray or someone's face. We're taking all of this content and we're sort of, we are morphing it into something that the browser can better understand. It's becoming more relevant to the browser. Okay, so I want you guys to try that out. That was exercise 1, 2, and 3.